Good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us for this February 3rd vBrownbag US. Tonight, we're going to be talking about introducing Microsoft Azure with our presenter tonight, Kevin Kelling. He can be reached on Twitter on @BlueShiftBlog. Oops. As always, you can get in on the conversation on Twitter going to @vBrownbag. Using the hashtag vBrownbag. We can also be found, well, the APAC and the EMEA stuff as well. Again, my name is Chris Williams. I will be your host this evening. I'll be taking questions both in the chat window and on Twitter. And without further ado, let me turn it over to Kevin.
Thank you very much, Chris, and good evening, everyone. And by the way, thank you very much for the opportunity. It's very, very much appreciated. And give us just a few seconds here, and I will begin presenting.
There you go. I can see your screen.
And is everybody able to see the
Kelling, and today I'd like to talk to you about introducing Microsoft Azure. A little bit about myself.
Oops.
So what we want to talk about.
My apologies, everyone. I actually recorded some video on audio on here, so let me just restart real quick.
Oh, I thought it got really quiet all of a sudden. I was like, your audio was really low.
I was wondering where that was coming from. My apologies.
The voice is in my head.
Live demos are always fun, so let me just go in here and clear all of that, and we'll start over and do that again. Is everyone able to see the screen? Let me minimize this. Get the control panel up. Is my screen coming across fine?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay. So once again, thank you very much for the opportunity. And I'm very. Why is my screen advancing? Back. And this evening, I'd like to talk about Microsoft Azure. And without any further ado, a very quick background on myself. So my name is Kevin Kelling, and I have over 20 years experience in IT doing various things. I've actually been working with Windows in the enterprise since Windows NT 3.1. I'm dating myself a little bit. I've been recognized as a VMware vExpert for the past 5 years, and I've worked for companies including Dell, Ricoh, and currently Microsoft. And if you want to reach out to me, my email address is kevin.kelling@microsoft.com. And my slides are advancing without me. That's a great feature. But when I started putting this together, I had the idea of going through some demos. I mean, all of you are a very technical audience. I didn't want to get into marketing stuff or any of that. And I started putting this together, and I kind of felt overwhelmed, and everything was very scattered. So I kind of took a step back, and I said, you know what would really help make this better is to really start out with an introduction, lay out the foundation of what is Azure, what can we do with it, and get some of those fundamentals out of the way as a foundation, and then perhaps in future. Why are my slides advancing all by themselves? I'm sorry, guys.
It's all good. This happens all the time.
I don't know if that's something I did or okay. But what I'd like everyone here to think about is, what I'd like to talk about today is an introduction to Azure. I'd like everyone to think about what else would you like to see in future sessions. And so, very much would like your input. Type in, as you watch the presentation and think about this. Go ahead and type in the chat window what kind of things you would like to see in a potential future session on Azure. And just to give you some examples, we do intend to, or we're hoping to, do a future session on IaaS, PaaS, a deeper dive in networking, containers, some of those things. And there's so many other areas ranging from identity management is a huge area. We'll talk about that just a little bit tonight. Storage, Azure Site Recovery, that applies to VMware environments too as well. If you want to quickly use Azure for disaster recovery for a current VMware deployment. Resource Manager, a lot of big stuff there. So as we talk about these things, please think about what are you most interested in and what would you like to see in future sessions. So what I'm hoping to address tonight is just really an overview of Azure. What are the elements in Azure? What can you do with it? What's in it? And how does it apply to some of the things we're doing? And again, just some of the really brief, some of the categories. There's so many. I'm going to try to do a very quick introduction to IaaS, PaaS, SaaS tonight, as well as identity management, some network storage fundamentals very quickly. A lot of the slides you're going to see tonight, I'm probably going to limit to 30 to 60 seconds. But almost every topic of that we're going to be talking about tonight, there are presentations that go over an hour on that topic. So we're just going to get into some really basic stuff there. And my slides are getting away from me. Here we go. So I guess the presentation wants me to advance. So right now, Azure is built on a global infrastructure. We have, actually those numbers are dated. Right now we have, stop advancing. Why are my slides advancing? Let me fix this from current slide. I'm sorry, everyone. Let me try that again. So right now, Azure is built on a global infrastructure, and like I said, I think there's 22 regions online, and 28 are planned for later this year, and that's actually more than AWS and Google combined in terms of regions, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But on top of that global infrastructure, we have infrastructure services. This is your IaaS foundation layer. So over on the left here, we have OS server compute. You have your virtual machines. You have your container services. The biggest key elements in your IaaS. We also have the storage elements. Premium storage is SSDs, by the way, in case you're wondering what that is. And we have our networking elements. We'll talk a little bit about ExpressRoute, Traffic Manager, what those are and what they do. But on top of that, we also have platform services. And the one thing you can take away from the slide is that Azure is really, really big. And I don't want to spend too much time on this slide, but just if you go through a few things over here. Where's my pointer? I don't know if you can see my mouse or not, but analytics and IT, there's a lot going on. IoT is a huge area with a lot of potential. In fact, this is where you're going to have some of your unstructured databases, Hadoop, things like that, and machine learning. There's a couple of different examples from Project Oxford about machine learning that are kind of interesting. Just to give you one example, actually, right now there is an app Microsoft made. It's on Android. I don't know if there's an iOS version, but it's called the Mimic Alarm. And it's actually like the most annoying alarm clock in the world. What it does is you set the alarm, and it will ask you to mimic a face or emotion or something, and using the camera it will observe you, connect to Azure's machine learning capabilities in the cloud, and analyze your actions to make sure they conform with what it's asking you to do. So that's just one example of some of the impressive things that are possible with machine learning. Above analytics and IT, we have data. Those are the more structured databases. SQL Data Warehouse, structured databases there. We have the Visual Studio here in the middle. Why? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that so quickly. Okay. And right up here in the top center, web and mobile, those are some of the key components of the PaaS, platform as a service elements. And just to the left of that, we have cloud services and service fabric, and we'll talk about that a little bit because those things help you to orchestrate and join together cloud services using those web apps, mobile apps, API apps, and joining them into more complex organizations of those resources, and we can do some pretty impressive things with that. On the left and right, we have a lot of other complementary services. So like over here on the left, you see Azure Active Directory. That is a very, very huge and important and growing area. It is a part of Azure. Oftentimes, it's sold and acquired as a part of the Enterprise Mobility Suite, but that's very important not only for Azure and extending your internal on-premises Active Directory accounts into Azure for your own internal use, but also for single sign-on to third-party SaaS applications, multi-factor authentications. Recently had some customers that were working on some of those types of projects too as well. On the other side of that, on the right, we also have domain services, and that's very interesting as well. This is, I think that just went into preview in November or December, so it's relatively new. It's still in preview. But what that is that's oftentimes there were scenarios where you would have to, it would be helpful to deploy a domain controller, an IaaS domain controller in Azure next to your SQL Server or other elements to help with certain things. And domain services is intended to provide all the capabilities of domain controllers, Kerberos, NTOM, group policy, all those things, but provide that as an SLA-backed service without the overhead of maintaining domain control. Maintaining domain controllers. So that's a very service we're excited about. It's also in preview. And backup, we'll talk about that a little bit. Azure Thread Recovery. So I'm probably talking about this slide way too much now, but I just want to kind of lay out the foundation, where the pieces are, and a lot of the elements that are in Azure.
No, this is good stuff.
Thank you. So a very quick overview. What is the industry saying about Azure? Where do we kind of stand in the industry? And this isn't really. I'm trying not to be competitive, but I want to level set. Where we are, so to speak. And if you look at this, Microsoft is able to fill in more dots here in terms of being able to build private services and deliver across all these other areas. And on the bottom of the slide, if you look at these are the magic quadrants. So here we have magic quadrants for the most recent ones for IaaS, for cloud storage, for PaaS, for x86 server virtualization, and for databases on the right there. And in every single one, not only is Microsoft in the leader quadrant, but Microsoft is either number 1 or number 2. And no one else has that dominant of a leadership position across so many different areas at the same time. So we're very excited about where we are and the position we have to operate from. And my slides are advancing. This is good, but it keeps me going. So this is a look at our current region. So right now we have. Hey, stop that! I'm sorry, guys. I don't know what I did to make this advance by itself.
If you want to take a second to kill that, you're more than welcome to. Don't feel pressured to jam through it if you want to take a moment to fix that.
If you don't mind, I to be perfectly honest, I don't know what I clicked or what I did to make that happen. But let me make sure that clear timings in all slides. Maybe that's it. Let me try that. I'm sorry about that, everyone. So jumping forward from that, right now we have 22 regions online, and we are bringing on another 6 regions in this current calendar year in Canada, in the UK, and in Germany this year. And a lot of, and some of the motivations for different regions, there's a lot of different reasons for geographical and so forth and regional, but also what's becoming more commonly a consideration is political boundaries. And a lot more companies are interested in, based on where they're positioned and what they're doing, they have an interest in which country is my data sitting in, that kind of a thing. So that's one driver behind putting up some of these data centers. Also on the slide, excuse me, a lot of people don't know this, but Microsoft is actually one of the top 3 networks in the world in terms of capacity, and we have many regions. And the bottom line on the slide there, just last September, I think, we launched the G Series. The G Series is the largest IaaS VM that's available in the public cloud today. And that is 32 cores, 448 gigs of RAM, and SSD available. Mark Rusinovich has a demo where he actually he takes this G5 virtual machine and he builds a 32 terabyte logical SSD inside the VM, runs Iometer, and he's able to get a throughput of 2 gigs per second against that 32 terabyte SSD drive in that virtual machine. So very, very large virtual machines are available in Azure. Very impressive. Just to kind of give you another idea of scale, so I thought this was kind of interesting. So the average space shuttle flight cost about $1.5 billion, and moving on to Hadron Collider, almost $5 billion. And if you add that $5 billion with operational costs of the Hadron Collider over several years, it was estimated that it cost about $13.25 billion to discover the Higgs boson protocol, the particle. So one way to look at this is that 10 space shuttle flights, the equivalent of that is how much money has been invested in Azure infrastructure to date, and we're already above 15 billion and growing, and adding more data centers this year already. So this gives you an idea of the scale and the immense capital that we're talking about when we're talking about Azure. And just a few marketing slides here. Don't want to spend too much time on this, but there is a lot going on, and I think so. Active Directory authentications. Actually, I think that we just passed. If we haven't passed, we're close to passing a rate of 1 trillion Azure Active Directory authentications every year. 1.5 million SQL databases are running in Azure right now, and across all of Azure, I think we're at about 3.4 million compute cores. So just to give it, and we just announced our second quarter results a week or two ago, and I believe that the year-over-year growth in Azure in constant currency was like 140%. So we're seeing very, very fantastic and exciting growth across the platform. And one thing about Azure is change. So we have had over 500 releases in the last 12 months. Sometimes a release is something coming out in preview, or a release graduating from preview into general availability, or GA. And there are some new things that just in the past. Let me put it this way: it's very uncommon for a week to go by and not have at least one or two release announcements for Azure. So very, very rapid pace of change. Azure is an open cloud, and 5 years ago, about 5 years ago, this was not necessarily the case. Linux was somewhat of a second-class citizen at that time. Today, that is no longer the case. Chef and Puppet integrations for provisioning are built into the platform. The Azure Container Service runs on Mesosphere. We have Hadoop Redis cache. I mean, and there are so many different images, Azure certified images, working with all of these companies, to Docker as well, to Cloud Foundry, all these vendors and solutions we work with. Most importantly, Red Hat. Recently, just I think December, we announced a major partnership with Red Hat towards making Azure the premium cloud for Red Hat Linux. The results of that now, the Red Hat images aren't yet on Azure. That's coming. There's a lot of different deliverables that are coming out of that partnership, but there'll be a lot being released during the course of this year along that front. There's a very large amount of activity on the Red Hat front, so we're very excited about that. Key point here again is Azure is an open cloud. Actually, I saw a slide, and I think over this past December, the ratio for new virtual machines that were deployed to Azure in the month of December, I think it was like 67% Linux and 34% Windows, something like that. So it varies from month to month, but that was a very particularly impressive month, that there is a very high amount of Linux being used in Azure. Any questions so far? I'm sorry, I'm just talking very fast. Any questions so far?
No. I haven't seen anything pop up yet, but you are doing fantastic.
Thank you very much. So one question that most companies have to go through in their cloud journey as they're going through this is public, private cloud. What do I want to use? And because of the large amounts of capital that are involved in some of the top-shelf public cloud offerings, most private clouds are not able to emulate the level of automation and rich features that are available in most top-shelf public clouds. So for that reason alone, most organizations are going to want to have public cloud in their toolbox. They're going to have it in their cloud mix. So what about private cloud? Well, there's still a lot of reasons for that too. Oftentimes those reasons aren't always technical. Sometimes there's policy reasons, there's directives, there's legal reasons. compliance reasons, many different reasons why certain workloads might not be able to be moved to the public cloud, or maybe just a preference, whatever the case may be. So the bottom line is that most organizations are going to have to live with both of these. They want to leverage what's in the public cloud, but some things are going to have to be local too. And we want to prevent sneaker net and some of those things, and kind of like, get our arms around things, so to speak, in a more sustainable manner. So, and what's interesting is when you look at this, there's some vendors that look at public cloud and say, well, cloud is over here, and we do cloud. And there's other vendors that say, well, cloud is over here, and we do cloud. And there ends up being a dichotomy of sorts between those two worlds. And sometimes in the on-premises space, what they're selling isn't always cloud either. Sometimes it's just virtualization. Now there are very good solutions ranging from Cloud Foundry to OpenStack that help you build more of a cloud-like infrastructure on premises, and those things are great. However, now you've got a leg in both ponds, so to speak. You're using private, using public. You've got different skill sets to work with, different runbooks, different APIs, different operational procedures, and those things can end up becoming a barrier that prevent us from being able to extract the full capability, the full value that would otherwise be available in these cloud options. So how do we kind of break down those walls and work through that? And that is something that that we are very excited about at Microsoft. Actually, just this past was it last week? Yes, last week we released the first technical preview of Azure Stack. So what is so Azure Pack has been out for a while. Azure Pack is based on the 2012 wave of products, but Azure Stack is designed around Windows Server 2016. We'll talk about that in a minute. And so we saw the chart of offerings where you have infrastructure services, and on top of that, all the PaaS offerings and everything else off to the side. What if we could emulate that and offer the same thing on both sides? And you could have the same scripting language, PowerShell. You could have the same portal, the same experience. You could develop your application in Visual Studio with the firewalls, the load balancing rules, with all of that in your application, and when deployment time comes, you can decide, you can make that decision, you can take your application in Visual Studio and say and decide, deploy it on premises, deploy to public cloud Azure. You have the option to write once and deploy anywhere, and that's a very exciting proposition that really no one else in the industry is really focusing on that aspect of it. Most public cloud providers are really focused on their public cloud. They're not really reaching into your data center, helping you to create a symbiotic relationship where you can have that common experience across both environments. So we're very excited about that, and we'll talk about a few things about that. One of the enablers for Azure Stack is Windows Server 2016. And what's going on here is that all the things that Microsoft had to do to make Azure what it is today, all the R&D, all the refinement, all the improvements, what we're doing here is Nano Server and the software load balancing, all these things were built in Azure to allow it to be everything that it is today, and we're taking those things and putting them, those tried and proved technologies that Azure is running on, those things are now being moved into Windows Server 2016. Nano Server, excuse me, I'm sorry. Nano Server, for just one example, that has a footprint 20 times smaller than Windows Server Core. The actual footprint is 400 megabytes. In fact, I think the WIM file for that is like 140 some megs. Very, very small, lightweight, bare metal, minimalist environment. It really cuts down. It not only cuts down on your surface profile for attacks and that kind of thing, but the frequency of patching is dramatically reduced. And also on Nano Server, there is no local management. All of the management is done remotely. So there's some really neat things, and that's probably a whole other hour talk just about that. So I'll stop talking and move on. But there's some really cool things that we're putting into Windows Server 2016 to make that possible. Real quick, one more feature in Windows 2016 is going to be Storage Spaces Direct. So this is a new twist on storage spaces that allows you to build a hyper-converged infrastructure using Windows Server 2016. And it's built with erasure coding. It has tiered storage built in. And just to give you one example, and REFS. So that I think REFS was introduced in 2012 R2, but there's been some major improvements to it in Windows Server 2016. And just to give one example, someone provisioned a 100 gig fixed disk, and it took 17 minutes to provision that. And once they implemented the resilient file system REFS on Windows Server 2016, they were able to provision that in less than 1 second. What hardware did they use? They used a Levana laptop with a SATA disk. So, what's going on there is that they're able to, the updates are being made in the directory table metadata of the file system, so that all those copy operations that would would normally take place are being offloaded. And so the implications for this for snapshots and backups and cloning and provisioning, very, very big implications for those kinds of activities here with a combination of REFS and Windows Server 2016. So going on from there, what features are going to be in Azure Stack? So the Azure Stack preview was released just this past Friday, and Azure Stack is expected to go into GA, general release, in the fourth quarter of this year. And the areas circled in green are going to be the areas of functionality that will be offered in Azure Stack. So the compute elements, virtual machine IaaS, container IaaS, and the basic networking elements, they'll be there, as well as many of the PaaS elements. Some of the PaaS elements are only going to be there in preview, and we'll talk in a little bit exactly what preview means. But they will be there in preview, and they'll graduate to GA later on. But the whole idea is to give the excuse me, I'm sorry, the capability to run the best of Azure IaaS and PaaS infrastructure on premises in your own environment as well. So I wanted everyone to think for a second about what is cloud computing. Now, I'm kidding. What do you really want to ask ourselves, right? Is should we be using the cloud? Of course, we should be using the cloud, and we all know the reasons behind that. There's so many different reasons. We don't need to talk about that. So, what I want everyone to really think about as we go through this is how can we, the key puzzle to optimizing value in the cloud computing is how can we optimize our cloud spend? When we take a step back and look at our end-tier applications, the way we're doing things, our operational processes, and once we can compare that to what's possible and what's available in cloud providers, oftentimes there's a very big gap between how we're doing things and how we could be doing things. So the key question is, do we think about what things could I exploit and take advantage of and use that would help our posture and help us do things more efficiently, so that we're not wasting money on either on-premises or clouds or buying the wrong cloud stuff. How are we doing the right stuff? And I just threw these slides in here real quick, and I just want to give just a real quick level set in this concept here. So when we all started doing virtualization, the original motivation and driver, the business driver for virtualization, was capital reduction. We had less servers, we had less power, we had less data center space. And as we started adopting it, we started to realize, hey, there's a better way of doing things. There's a better way of provisioning. There's a better way of managing. There's a better way of monitoring. And we began to capture and realize more value moving up the stack in the operational expenses area. And we began transforming away from the cost center model to, really working with the business and so forth. So taking that same model and applying it to cloud, a lot of organizations start out with IaaS and they get their feet wet here. And IaaS will always be around. Don't get me wrong here, but as you start to kind of evolve in your journey, you start to look at some of the higher tiered functions that are available in cloud. You start to look at PaaS, IoT, we'll get into the service fabric a little bit, and all these other areas, and you start to think about cloud native applications and those kinds of things. So So most of us are going to evolve from a point of starting out with test dev workloads, our seasonal, our burst workloads, disaster recovery, and then we start moving production data into the cloud, and then we really start working with cloud native applications, and at that point we're really starting to get to a point where we can step back and look and start thinking about is our use of cloud optimized for our workloads and what we want to do as a business. So I just encourage everyone, no matter what cloud provider you're using, I would just encourage everyone to kind of step back and think about those things and apply that to what you have in your environment today. So real quick, I just want to talk about a few fundamentals in Azure. I want to go over network storage compute, as well as the service level agreement. What's going on there? What's that all about? And get into just a few fundamentals about IaaS and the IaaS and PaaS offerings available in Azure. So to start out with network, to start out with network, there's a couple of different options for connecting. And this is very common across many cloud providers. You can do a point-to-site configuration. This is very common for developers where you install a certificate on the laptop and that device, they can have a VPN right from that device. Site-to-site VPN, and this is also very common, and it works with the vast majority of VPN solutions. And on top of that, we have ExpressRoute. ExpressRoute is a dedicated private circuit that is available through many different providers, and this is going to be your best choice for your mesh MPLS networks. And where is that available? It's available from a wide variety of partners. AT&T and Verizon in the Americas is just to name a few. And you can see the yellow dots are the locations where ExpressRoute is available. And we also have many content delivery networks distributed across the globe too as well. And we'll talk about those. Excuse me. We'll talk about those in a minute. Just to show a few very basic elements in Azure networking. So let's say, for example, you have an n-tier application, and you might have some back-end servers. Maybe you have 3 virtual machines running SQL, and that comprises the back-end of your n-tier application. So what you can do on top of that is put the Azure internal load balancers. There's different load balancers in Azure for different scenarios. This one is an internal load balancer with an internal IP address, usually a 10net is most common. So this would be an IP exclusive to your virtual network within Azure. On top of that, you're going to have your web tier. So let's say, for example, you have 3 VMs, and then that comprises your web tier. And on top of that, you have the option of deploying Azure Traffic Manager. Azure Traffic Manager will integrate with DNS. So that, let's say, for example, your web tier is spanned across more than one region. So what this will do is this will identify the region that the client is in and work with DNS to automatically redirect the end user or the client to the VM instance in your web tier that's going to be in a region more beneficial to them. On top of that, there is the content delivery network, and that's where you can pre-stage and publish multimedia files, movies, pictures, things like that. Those website elements that you don't want users to have to traverse an ocean with high latency to try and pull the content down. So those are some of the basic elements that are available from a networking perspective. And there's a lot more beyond that, but we're just working on the basics so far. Autoscaling is a very key feature. This is implemented across Azure. So autoscaling, and my apologies, I'm having problems with my voice tonight. Autoscaling is a feature that's prevalent throughout Azure, and it's implemented in a couple of different ways. Within a single virtual machine, you can have that virtual machine autoscale its CPU capacity and its memory capacity based on metrics that you define. For example, you might define if CPU is higher than X for Y minutes, then increase by this percent for and you have control over the scale up and scale down, how aggressively you want to scale up and scale down for those things to to maintain and manage the cost of your workloads too as well. At the same time, not only can you auto-scale virtual machines, you can auto-scale cloud services and service fabric elements too as well. And what that means is you might have an application that's comprised of many different instances. And to give you an example of a cloud service, you might start with 5 instances, and these are basically PaaS instances of IIS VMs. And you can have that cloud service automatically provision, spin up based on your templates, more and more instances for the web tier or middleware, whatever tier it is, to accommodate any bursts in demand. And this also works on message queues too as well, by the way. So this is a very prevalent feature throughout Azure, being able to auto scale on demand. Just a few basic fundamentals for storage. So locally redundant storage is going to be the most economical option, and this means that there are 3 copies of your data maintained in one region. Now, zone redundant storage, I'm not going to talk about that because that is for a specific use case. The most common use case you'll see for across regions is going to be GRS. That is geographically redundant storage. That's kind of like LRS times 2, but across 2 regions. So what you basically have there is 6 copies. You have 3 copies within region A, replicated to another 3 copies in region B. On top of that, there is another tier for read access GRS, and that's a more aggressive replication scenario. And in the secondary site, that information is available for reads. So there's a couple of different scenarios where that might come in handy. One is if you're looking at recovery time, RTO. There's a much smaller RTO for region failovers with that model of storage. Another example is you might have some data that you want to run some batch jobs or some reporting jobs against that, which are read-only in nature. That's one other option for which you can do that in a different region without impacting the production data. Azure Files is a service, and the Azure Files is exactly what it sounds like. It's basically a SMB file share as a service. So if your applications leverage a file share, you don't have to worry about trying to build a highly available file cluster in Azure. That's available as a service. So this is SMB file shares as a service. There is a REST API, so there is a programmable API behind this as well that you can exploit for your applications as well as make them available for SMB. And of course, that is all backed by an SLA.
We do have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
This goes back to the auto scaling. The question is, how are you able to auto scale up and down? Everybody knows how we can auto scale up, but down has always been a challenge.
Yes, you know what? If we have time tonight, we can bring up the portal and kind of walk through some of the options there. I don't know how much time. If not, we can do that in a future session. Absolutely. Okay. But the short answer is, without having the screen in front of me, there are options for after X amount of time, scale down by this much, and so you have some control there over how aggressively you want to scale down after you've already burst.
And that's without a guest reboot, right?
Yes, absolutely. Without a reboot, absolutely.
Nice.
So what is preview versus GA? So features in Azure are initially released as a preview. And what that means is that there is no SLA, there is no guarantee of service behind them. Only GA services are backed by the Azure SLA. So the recommendation here is that when a feature is in preview, this is an opportunity for you to play with it, become familiar with it, use it for test dev workloads. It's recommended that you not use it for mission critical or production workloads, because basically Basically, in essence, it's like a beta of the service. So there may be some disruptions while that feature is in preview, or bugs and so forth. So once those issues have been addressed, the feature will graduate onto GA, and at that point, it will become backed by the Azure SLA. So what is the Azure SLA? The Azure SLA is that 99.95% uptime is guaranteed. That equates to, over the course of a year, that equates to 4.38 hours. So where are the boundaries for this? So what's included, basically, at the end of the day, this is the availability of your virtual machine. So if your virtual machine is not available because of a networking issue in Azure, or the VM is just down, or there's anything within the Azure infrastructure that's impairing the function of that virtual machine, that will trigger the SLA. And if the SLA is violated, there are credits and financial compensations, and then there's a whole long legal wording behind that. But there's a whole system of credits behind backing up the SLA if there was a very significant outage, for example. So what is not included? So VM container crashes, an OS crash, or let's say, for example, you have an application, but the load balancing or the high availability configured in your cluster was not done properly. That burden of responsibility is on the application owner to maintain that. So what Azure is guaranteeing here is the availability of the network and the VMs. To visualize that, there are fault domains. A fault domain is a logical construct within Azure. So oftentimes, not always, but in most cases, that will equate to a rack. So, for example, we have an application that has a web tier and a backend for database. And let's say, for example, that one rack fails. So as long as you define both your IS servers in an availability set, and both of your databases. So basically, every tier in your application, your web tier, your middle tier, your backend tier, as long as you define each of them as an availability set, Azure will automatically span those across as many fault domains as it can to minimize the impact of any one fault domain, for example, i.e. a rack on your environment. And as long as this is done, and your applications are in an availability group, you do qualify for the SLA. If your VMs are not in an availability group, the SLA is disqualified. And just real quick, there's so much to talk about PowerShell, but real quick, PowerShell is a very, very powerful scripting language, and once you really start leveraging public cloud and doing things, your runbooks and scripts become so much more important. In my background, I spent a lot of time in on-premises infrastructure, and once you start making that transition to public cloud, those scripts and those runbooks become so much more important, especially for disaster recovery scenarios or redeploying elements of an entire application. So PowerShell, and this is the same PowerShell, it's built into Windows, but there are hundreds of Azure-specific commandlets. So anything that you can do in Azure, from adding a new virtual disk to a VM to creating a new Azure blob table or whatever it is, everything is programmatically possible through the PowerShell interface. And we could talk for a long time about that. There's a lot going on there. The Azure portal. Yeah, there's a lot. So the Azure portal actually just this past December, the new portal went GA. So for a long time there was a classic portal in Azure, and for most of this past year, most of 2015, the new portal was in preview, and it just graduated to GA. There are so many features in the portal, and so many things. I'm hoping I have time to walk through it tonight. I'm not sure if I will, but there's so many features available in this. And one of the more important ones we want to talk about is ARM, Azure Resource Manager. And Actually, I think maybe in the next slide, I think we'll talk about that. Yes, we will. So what is Azure Resource Manager? So up until now in Azure, let's say, for example, you had a web server and a SQL server in your application. It was up to you to really build the conduit and the glue and connect your virtual network, the proper storage account, the proper VMs. It was up to you to kind of pick the right parts and glue that all together. Azure Resource Manager is a logical construct that really helps us to put boundaries around things where they make sense. So this is deceptively simple. At the surface, every object in Azure, for example, every storage account, every virtual network, every VM, every PaaS feature lives in a resource group, but it can only be in one resource group at a time. And what you want to do is you want to group like elements that share a common life cycle, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But one thing, going to the bottom point here about grouping, one thing that's very important is this is also a security boundary, and you can do some really amazing things here. You can delegate access, and I'm getting ahead of myself, but along with Azure Resource Manager, we released role-based access control just this past and that allows you to delegate and provide more granular access to the elements in Azure. So now, just to give you one example, you can build a resource group with ARM. It's a security boundary. You can identify and delegate permissions to manage the resources, and you can meter it, and you can put quotas on. You can put rules to say don't allow them to spin up more than X instances, don't allow their storage account to consume more than X gigabyte, or don't allow the whole entity as a whole to exceed a billing rate of X. So you can do some really cool things here. You know, maybe you're making some resources available to your developers, but you want to put some boundaries on how much they're able to consume. This is a great way of doing that. So what resources do you want to put in a resource group? So on the top box, for example, let's say you have an N-tier application. Very oftentimes, the web servers in your application will have a different life cycle from your middleware, which has a different life cycle from your databases. So, in one example, you might have one resource group for the web and database, one for your storage elements, and one for your middleware. Whatever makes sense, wherever the boundaries are for common life cycle and management is where you want is typically where you'll get the most value from defining defining a resource group. And just to give some more background on that, there's auditing of this. So this is great because now you can take that resource group, which has all its elements into it, and you can look in there and you can see exactly who changed what to the network in this resource group, or this virtual machine, or that virtual machine. Every single change within that resource group is audited. And this is a very welcome feature, I can assure you, in many environments. Tagging is a new construct that comes along with this. So where a resource group is a tightly coupled defined construct, tags are a loose construct that can span all these boundaries. So you can tag different networks, and there's so many different reasons for tagging: for reporting, cost accounting, or maybe you want to tag different elements that you're going to run a PowerShell script against different things. So tags transcend all the other boundaries and allow you to leverage those tags for scripting, for reporting, for so many different functions. On top of that, like we talked about, so looking at this, I don't know if my cursor is showing up here on the screen, but this box here on the center right.
Yeah, we can see it.
At the very top of the hierarchy, you have a subscription, and then you have your resource groups that we talked about, and then the elements inside those resource groups. So again, what you can do is within that hierarchy, you can define role-based access control at every single level. You might want to give, maybe there's one person and you only trust them for one element of your resource group. You can do that. So this is a very welcome, and this is something we're very excited about because it really solves a lot of problems for reporting, for quotas, for security and operational aspects. There's a lot that can be done with this, and actually there's quite a bit more we'll get into. But with ARM Resource Manager comes Resource Manager templates. And in this scenario, configuration literally is code. And what you can do here is you can define templates. And as you see here, this particular virtual machine, you have a very specific storage account, a NIC, a virtual network, a second NIC with a load balancer and a public IP. There's many, as you see on the left, there's many more elements that you can put in this. And actually, if you go into GitHub, if you go on GitHub and search for the Azure Resource Manager templates, you'll see a lot of templates out there. And this construct will allow other services to leverage this to really build your own custom images and get to the point where if you want to redeploy a whole application, and this is the whole stack, the storage account, the NIC, all these things, maybe the only thing you need to change is the IP. This is a mechanism that you can very quickly do that from a predefined template.
That's really cool.
We think it is too. Thank you. So, I want to switch back, and I'm going back and forth here, but I want to go into IaaS and PaaS just a little bit here. So, on the very, and this isn't, I picked the wrong colors here, but on the very far left, excuse me, the far left is package software, where virtually the consumer manages the entire stack, absolutely everything. So now we graduate to infrastructure as a service, and this is where everything up to the virtualization stack is managed by the vendor. So the operating system and everything on top of that is what you, the consumer, is going to be responsible for. Once you get to the PaaS model, the operating system, the middleware, and the runtime disappear from that, and at that point you're really only focused on your data and the applications. So one common saying that I hear a lot is that if it needs a developer, it's PaaS, and that's why, because you're really focused on developer-type functions at that point without having to worry about the operating system, the middleware. All of that is managed by the vendor in the PaaS offering. And of course, in the SaaS model, absolutely everything is provided by the vendor. A great example of SaaS would be Office 365, Salesforce, etc. So what do the IaaS and PaaS elements look like in Azure? So for IaaS, the basic two elements are the virtual machine and the container. For the PaaS elements, there are web apps, there's API apps, there's mobile apps. We have the web roles and worker roles. They're a part of a cloud service. I'll talk about that in a minute. And there's databases as a service, SQL as a service. So you can actually get a SQL database and not have to worry about managing the underlying operating system or anything. It's just a SQL database. So in the PaaS offering, there's a couple of different constructs for this, and one of them is a cloud service. Excuse me, I'm sorry. So what you're doing here is you're developing an application in Visual Studio. And from that comes your configuration, your code, and within your cloud service, you're defining web roles and worker roles. Now, behind the scenes, what's really happening here is that a web role is really a virtual machine running IIS. And a worker role is really a virtual machine running Windows. And within your application, that worker role is running whatever executable or process you have defined for that role. And so behind the scenes, these really are virtual machines, but that's not being exposed to you. What you're really getting is a consistent delivery behind those services. So what you can do is within your cloud service, when you build it, define it in Visual Studio, and this is very important for autoscale because now you can say once my if my message queue starts hitting this point, or if my overall latency, I'm sorry, response time is a better example. If my response time and these two metrics are equal this, then add more web roles, add more worker roles. So it'll actually take your template for that IIS instance or that Windows instance and spin up more instances inside that service to be able to grow and shrink that cloud service as one logical entity. So there's built-in health monitoring, there's built-in autoscale. Also, another feature in cloud service, I'm sorry, I'm probably talking too fast, but as I'm remembering these things, also, what's very important is that there is a staging environment here. So what you can do is once you've pushed your app to production, and now you're developing the next version of your app, and you can build that separately and expose that to a different URL, test it, verify it, and once you're ready to deploy that new code into production, you simply have to swap them. So there are staging slots available to make that test of QA production process much easier. Now, going beyond the cloud service, there's a whole new service that is being offered called Service Fabric, and this is where more and more where things are going to be going. So this is microservices. Now, I'll give you a very simple explanation of a microservice is that it's a stateful service. So what we're doing here is these aren't IaaS VMs anymore. These are micro instances that are built to be minimalist and serve a very specific purpose. And because microservices are stateful, you can have the data close to the transaction. And what you can do here, and just to give you an example of, you can have full rolling upgrades within your application. You can have automated rollback. So what you're doing is you're leveraging Azure Resource Manager. You're leveraging the templates, the Azure Resource Manager templates. All that logic, Service Fabric is kind of the brains or the AI. It's the logic control layer behind all this. So it knows all those things about your application. It knows what elements are supposed to be there, how it's supposed to be configured. So let's say, for example, that one of your web tier servers just dies. The Service Fabric will see that and it'll spin up a new one and fix it. Self-healing applications. When you upgrade a certain, you can do some really fancy things about a very focused upgrade of a very focused incremental upgrade, a rolling upgrade of your application within microservices, and have the protection for automated rollback behind that. Because again, the Service Fabric knows all those things about your application from your templates, from your resource groups, and so on and so forth. So we are very excited about the capabilities of this. So what is the Azure Service Fabric? Is this something new? So right now, all of these services, Azure Database, DocumentDB, Power BI, all of the aspects of Azure networking, Azure Compute, Service Bus, and at the bottom, Cortana. So every time you do a Cortana search on a Windows 10 device, the back-end cloud services for Cortana are actually running on Azure Service Fabric using microservices. So this is not something new. This has been in production for over 5 years, and the other important thing to keep in mind here is that this isn't a dumbed down or a consumer version of Service Fabric. This is the real thing. This is the same thing that the SDK that's available for this. That you download that SDK, put it in Visual Studio. It's the exact same SDK that Microsoft uses internally to build all of these things. And that same SDK is available to everyone to build their own applications using the Service Fabric. So this is I think Service Fabric is still in preview, if I'm not mistaken. I need to go back and look. There's so many moving parts, but this is something we're very excited about, looking to the future of what's possible in the platform as a service space. And just to kind of give a overview of where this all sits. So you have at the bottom right, On the left, you can have an Azure consistent public cloud. This is Azure Stack. And on top of those layers, you can have your IaaS elements, VMs and scales, your VM extensions, and your options. You can use things like Mesos, Scalar, RightScale for your cluster orchestration. You can use Marathon, Cloud Foundry, those other elements to build your own PaaS infrastructure, or you can use the Azure Fabric. It's open. You have choice as to what kind of topology, what vendors, what solutions you want to work with to build your infrastructure and your applications. And just to give another visual for this continuum, so on the left-hand side, you have the control over IaaS, or you have full control over that. And as you move to the right and get into Service Fabric and the PaaS element that's on top of that, this is commonly used in cases where you want to have a very rapidly deploy a very large amount of services in a very short period of time. This is where things like Service Fabric and web apps, those PaaS elements are going to give you the most value. So going back and looking at the different elements in the stack in Azure, and to be honest, I'm not sure why I put this slide here. There's probably something I wanted to talk about. But does anyone have any questions about some of these pieces so far and where they fit in? So far, so good. Okay, great.
Oh, sorry, I was muted.
So moving on.
There is a recommendation question from Matt, but I'll ask that after we wrap up. It's actually more of a future podcast idea.
Oh, okay, great. Any ideas on future sessions or topics of interest? Absolutely, would love to see what those are.
I've got a couple.
Thank you. Great. So Azure Security Center is something that, gosh, this went live in, I'm trying to remember, I think it was September or October, right about then, that this went live. This is something that we're also very excited about. So what we're doing here is this service will automatically analyze all of the elements in your subscription for security events. And there's two different tiers of service. I'm trying to remember where those boundaries are. I'll talk about that in a second. But not only is there built-in functionality within Azure that for your VMs, but there's also all these vendors here: Trend Micro, F5, Cisco, Checkpoint. They can plug into the Azure Security Center with their solutions for even more integration and more functionality around security. So just a very, again, there's like a 1 hour, there's probably like a couple hours of different sessions around what this is and how it can be used, but a very brief high-level overview. This is analytics-driven intelligence, and what we're doing here, we're scanning across everything in your subscription. We're looking at compromised machines, failed exploit attempts, brute force attacks. Are people extracting data? Is there some advanced malware in your environment? All of these things are being looked at. And what do you see as users? Just as a very basic example, there's some screenshots I grabbed. If you look here, you can get some indications as to which of your IaaS VMs don't have malware. Which of your SQL services don't have auditing? How many? Here's 10 systems that are missing system updates. Some systems that are missing ACLs on they could have some exposure on the network there, and some are pending reboots. Those are some of the basic availabilities that are in the free tier, the built-in free tier of Security Center. And on top of that, there's even things like intrusion detection, RDP brute force attacks, suspicious RDP activity. So this service is just there, and it's watching all things, scanning your event. If it's a Windows system, it's scanning your Windows event logs. It's scanning the appropriate logs on Linux and other systems. So this is a very powerful system that can be leveraged to really get some grasp of security and events around all of your elements that are in the Azure public cloud. Identity management. This is a huge area that is every customer every customer I've spoken to recently has projects going on surrounding these areas. There was one customer that had what could have been a data breach. They caught it just in time. They prevented it, and as a result of that, they realized they had an awareness of how important security was, and they made very quick moves to implement single sign-on, not only across internally for VPN and employees coming in to access their Citrix applications, but they also extended that to the cloud, so that when they would sign into to third-party SaaS applications, they could leverage not only single sign-on but also a portal for password resets and also multi-factor authentication. I use as a Microsoft employee, I use multi-factor authentication. Just to give an example, if I try to VPN into the office, or if I go to a non-trusted computer and I try to bring up the Azure portal, I type in my credentials. What immediately happens is a message is sent to my phone. And then I open my phone. I type in the PIN on my phone, and then I'm allowed in. So I type in my first factor is my credentials that I type in, and then that engages a second call back to my phone, and another PIN that I enter. So that there's probably maybe even more than two factors in play there. So, but even though that sounds complicated, it's really easy to use, and it is. It really is not a burden, and it's actually a pleasure and very efficient to use. Being completely honest and forthright there. So there's so much going on in identity management. No, I'm not sure how much time we have to talk about that, but what's often done here is you have your on-premises Active Directory, and you can deploy ADFS, Active Directory Federation Services on-site, and from there you deploy Azure AD Connect. So what we used to have there is DirSync and with Office 365 there were DirSync and some other products that came from that. Just this past summer or fall, Azure AD Connect was released, and they really wrapped up a whole bunch of different products and made that bridge connection. That bridge connection between ADFS and the Azure Active Directory much more efficient and easier to set up and manage. There is also a health check built in there to alert you to if the service is not functioning or there's some suspicious activity going on. Real quick, what did I have here? There's a couple different ways of doing authentication in Azure Active Directory, and I don't spend too much time on it. That's almost a different presentation. But you can do a password hash, and a password hash is okay, but understandably, there's a lot of companies, a lot of organizations that don't want, for security reasons, they're not comfortable with it. And what we see as the most common topology is federation, where ADFS is deployed in between as a secure token source. And from there, we have identity synchronization and federation through that service, which is more secure, a more common topology. There are thousands of applications, SaaS applications, predefined in Azure. So when you don't have to go through all the pain of setting up those SAML connection strings or whatever method they're offering. There are thousands of, I forget the number, but I know. I don't want to say a number because I don't want to get it wrong, but there are thousands of SaaS applications already predefined in Azure to connect to for single sign-on. And this is a very quick slide that kind of visualizes through the multi-factor authentication process. The user will initiate their connection to the third-party SaaS application, and from there, the user will get a prompt on their phone. And that goes back to Azure Active Directory, and once it passes there, it goes back into the application. Oops, I went through that too fast. I'm sorry. I think that was so. There you can see the elements, the different authentication protocol or the communication authentication protocols on the left, SAML to your cloud apps, different protocols that are available for that. Another quick service I wanted to mention is the Azure Backup Service. So with the Azure Backup Service, you can back up on-premises Windows servers, physical Windows servers, but also just this past fourth quarter, Azure Backup for IaaS was launched. So now all of your Windows and Linux VMs that are running as IaaS VMs in Azure, you can back those up using the Azure Vault service, and all those features you expect in a backup product: scheduling, retention, throttling, incrementals, compression, encryption, granular restore, and you can leverage depending on the storage account. You can span regions for this for even more reliability and durability. So there's a lot of the options in here for backups of both on-prem and Azure IaaS VMs. Or you can work with one of our third-party partners. Veeam is a very popular backup product, and their service is already pre-populated and predefined on Microsoft Azure, and you can leverage their Azure-based service as a repository to publish your Veeam backups into. Cloud-based storage of your backups. Azure Site Recovery. This has been a very popular feature, and this is available for VMware environments. And this recently went through a very big overhaul. The first introduction of Azure Site Recovery for VMware, it required a lot of servers, and there was a lot of overhead. There was a lot of excessive overhead in terms of the amount of servers and the operational overhead that made it a less attractive solution than it should have been. The solution has been completely overhauled just this past quarter, and I believe it's a single server configuration now, and so it's much easier to deploy. And what you're basically doing here is do I have any animation on here? Yes, I do. So what you're basically doing here is this will connect to your existing vSphere infrastructure, and you can configure the replication of those VMs to Azure, and also how to handle disaster recovery situations and the runbooks and some of those things in there too as well. And you can also use that in a burst scenario. Let's say, for example, you have an on-premises application in VMware, and you might need some burst capacity in the cloud. This that feature is available in here to kind of logically extend that along with the replication and DR function that is available in the solution. And again, that's probably a full 1 hour deep dive into that feature alone. So we went through a lot of stuff. I'm not sure if I'm behind. Yeah, we went over on time a little bit. My apologies. But as you think about this, there are so many different ways to leverage cloud computing. Whether in the public cloud, in the private cloud, hybrid cloud, and there's so many different types of IaaS and PaaS and all these things. So think of it. Take a step back from your end-tier applications and think about your operations. How am I using things today, and what are some ways that I can improve, even if it's just disaster recovery, burst, whatever scenario. Very oftentimes there's a better way of re-architecting our processes and our applications to make them work better for us. And right now, if anyone goes to if anyone goes to Azure.Microsoft.com right now and creates a free account, that free account will automatically be granted a $200 credit towards consumption in the Azure cloud.
Nice.
So at this time, if we have any time available, I'd like to open the floor to any questions that may have come in.
So one of the questions was, and this is like the follow-up presentation, was any chance we might see a walkthrough / setup of a new PaaS and IaaS Azure environment at a later date?
Yeah, we would love to, absolutely. And I had hoped to have some colleagues in this call, but unfortunately we have an internal Tech Ready conference going on, so there weren't very many people available this week. But I'm hoping to round up a few folks, and what I would love to do is have a session focused on IaaS and a session focused on PaaS, and as a part of that, walk through the creation of those elements, both in the Azure portal and also from PowerShell, so and we can do a live walkthrough and live discussion back and forth
Yeah, that would be
about
awesome.
various scenarios. Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Okay, that was the last question locally. Let me double check the Twitter feeds, and I think we're good. I think we're in the clear.
Well, thank you very much, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity, and hoping to be back soon with more content.
Excellent, excellent. I'm going to go ahead and click stop record now.